"He can't hear you. He's gone," the senior doctor said, as the new nurse stood by the bed of the dying SEAL Admiral. Every expert had tried, every machine had failed, and there was no response. The heart monitor beeped with a frantic, hollow rhythm. The air in the room was cold with hopelessness. She didn't argue. She just looked at him for a long, quiet moment, as if she knew a secret no one else did. Then she stepped closer. She leaned down to his ear and whispered a single call sign. At that moment, the world stopped. Anna Cole was 28 years old, but her eyes held the stillness of someone who had seen the earth shatter and remain standing. She was the newest nurse at St. Jude's Military Wing, a facility known for treating the high-ranking elite of the armed forces. To her supervisors and the prestigious resident surgeons, Anna was little more than a ghost. She was quiet, she didn't join the frantic cafeteria gossip, and she never flaunted her credentials. Because she didn't have a glittering Ivy League resume on file, she was frequently dismissed as just an extra nurse, someone who was only there to fill a gap in the schedule. Her shifts were intentionally filled with the most mundane, repetitive tasks: restocking bandages, changing linens, and updating the digital charts of stable patients. She was never assigned to the high-stakes cases in the intensive care pods. The senior staff treated her like a trainee who lacked the stomach for real trauma. Brenda, the head nurse, often barked at her to stay in the hallway and leave the real medicine to the experts who know what they're doing. Anna never fought back. She simply nodded, performed her duties with mechanical precision, and watched. She watched everything. One rainy Tuesday, the quiet hum of the wing was replaced by the thunder of heavy boots and the frantic rhythmic barking of radio transmissions. Admiral Richard Sterling, a legendary figure in the Navy SEAL community, was brought in under heavy guard. He was a man of iron, a titan who had survived 3 decades of covert warfare across every continent. But now he was losing a battle against a mysterious, systemic neurological failure. He had collapsed during a high-level briefing at the Pentagon, and his vitals had been in a terrifying downward spiral ever since. The hospital's best minds were immediately summoned to the VIP trauma suite. Dr. Vance, a world-renowned cardiologist with an ego significantly larger than his reputation, led the team. The pressure in the room was suffocating. Armed SEALs stood at the door, their faces masks of stone, but their eyes screaming with the raw fear of losing their father figure. The military brass demanded immediate results. The media was already circling the parking lot like vultures. Anna was assigned to shadow the team, which was essentially a polite way of saying she should stay in the corner, keep her mouth shut, and stay out of the way of the real doctors. As Dr. Vance rattled off complex theoretical diagnoses and ordered a cocktail of high-potency drugs, Anna stood near the foot of the Admiral's bed. While the doctors stared at the glowing LED screens and the fluttering EKG lines, Anna looked at the man. She noticed the subtle way his jaw tension shifted when the heavy metal door slammed. She noticed the specific rhythmic twitch of his left index finger, a movement that didn't align with his erratic heart rate. To Dr. Vance, it was merely a neurological glitch, a symptom of the brain shutting down. To Anna, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like a signal. She stepped forward, intending to point out the anomaly she had spotted. "Doctor, if you look at the pressure on the occipital ridge and the hand twitch, he might be reacting to external stimuli differently than—" "Stay back, Nurse Cole," Vance snapped, not even bothering to look up from his tablet. "This isn't a classroom for beginners. We are dealing with a Tier 1 national security crisis. Go find some gauze or do something useful for once. Do not interrupt me again with your amateur observations." Anna retreated back to the shadows of the room. The other senior nurses smirked, whispering about her trying to play hero. Anna stood against the wall, her hands clasped tightly. She saw the despair growing like a fog in the room. She saw the Admiral's skin color shifting from a healthy bronze to a sickly, translucent white. The most advanced medicine in the world was being thrown at him, but his body wasn't receiving it. He was locked inside a fortress of his own mind, and the doctors were trying to pick a lock they didn't even understand was there. As the sun began to set behind the rain clouds, the hope in the room vanished. The monitor's alarms became a constant, depressing drone that signaled the end. The senior doctors began to look at their watches, already mentally composing the language for the official press release. Anna remained the only person in the room who hadn't looked away from the Admiral's face. She knew the medical charts were only half the story. The other half was written in scars, silence, and a language she had learned long before she ever wore a nurse's uniform in the civilian world. If you have ever been ignored when you had the answer, type unfair. Midnight approached, and the Admiral's vitals plummeted into the red zone. The cardiac rhythm was irregular, skipping beats like an engine running out of fuel in the middle of a storm. Dr. Vance was sweating now, his professional arrogance beginning to fray at the edges. In a desperate last-ditch attempt to save his own reputation from a high-profile failure, he ordered a massive high-dose adrenaline drip and a round of aggressive defibrillation. Anna felt a cold shiver shoot down her spine. She knew the Admiral's history, at least the classified parts that weren't in the redacted hospital files. She understood that his body wasn't failing because of a lack of chemical stimulation. It was failing because of a neurological overload of past trauma. His brain had retreated into a defensive posture. "Doctor, wait," Anna said, her voice louder and firmer with time cutting through the electronic beeping. "A massive adrenaline surge will cause a hypertensive crisis. His heart isn't the primary problem. It's his sympathetic nervous system. He thinks he's still in the field, trapped in a hostile zone. He's in a state of tactical lock." The room went deathly silent. Dr. Vance turned slowly, his face a deep, furious shade of red. "A tactical lock? What nursing school did you go to, Cole? The one where they teach fairy tales and action movies. This is a world-class medical facility, not a Hollywood script. Administer the drip immediately. That is a direct order." The SEALs at the door shifted their weight. One of them, a lieutenant with a jagged scar on his chin named Elias, looked at Anna. He saw something in her eyes, a focus, a lack of fear, that made him pause. But he was trained to follow the chain of command, and right now the man in the white coat was the commander of the room. The drugs were administered. Just as Anna had predicted, the Admiral's body reacted with violent rejection. His back arched off the bed, his eyes flew wide open, though they remained vacant and unfocused, and the monitor shrieked as his blood pressure hit critical, life-threatening levels. "Vance, he's crashing! Ventricular fibrillation!" a resident shouted. "Clear," Vance yelled, grabbing the defibrillator paddles. The Admiral's body jerked under the surge of electricity. Once, twice. The EKG line on the screen suddenly flattened into a terrifying, continuous green hum. "It's over," Vance whispered, dropping the paddles onto the bed. He looked at the SEALs at the door, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry. There was too much systemic damage. We've lost him." Lieutenant Elias stepped into the room, his hand trembling as he reached for the Admiral's cold, limp hand. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the quiet sobs of a junior resident. Dr. Vance began to pull his gloves off, already calculating how to shift the blame to the underlying condition. But Anna Cole didn't move toward the door. She walked past the doctors. She walked past the mourning soldiers. She stepped into the physical space that Dr. Vance had abandoned in his defeat. She didn't look at the flat line on the monitor. She didn't look at the clock on the wall. She leaned over the Admiral. She placed her hand firmly on his forehead, not as a nurse checking a temperature, but as a sister in arms grounding a brother who was lost in the dark. She leaned down until her lips were only inches from his ear, ignoring the gasps of the staff behind her. The room watched, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her move. Vance was about to shout for security to remove her, but Lieutenant Elias held up a hand, silencing the doctor with a single sharp look. There was a power in Anna's presence that suddenly commanded the entire room. She whispered 4 words. Words that weren't in any medical textbook in the world. Words that were buried in the archives of a classified operation from a decade ago. "Iron Shadow. Home base is open. The extraction is clear." Elias's eyes widened until they were dinner plates. That was a call sign so secret, so deeply buried in the Black Ops world, that even he hadn't heard it in 5 years. It was the signal used during the infamous Ghost Ridge extraction. For 5 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The flat line continued its hollow, high-pitched scream. Vance began to reach for her arm to pull her away. That's enough, nurse. You're disturbing the dignity of the... Thump. The monitor jumped. A single, solitary beat. Thump, thump. The green line began to dance again. It was weak, it was struggling, but it was unmistakably there. The Admiral's hand, previously cold and limp, suddenly clamped down on Anna's wrist with the terrifying strength of a drowning man. His eyes, though still closed, moved frantically beneath his lids. The entire room froze. It was a medical miracle that defied every protocol and every piece of logic in the building. Anna didn't look surprised or relieved. She looked entirely focused. "Get me a lidocaine kit and a manual pump," Anna commanded. She didn't ask, she told. "And get Dr. Vance out of this room. He's a distraction to the patients of recovery. Now." If you have ever realized that a person's title doesn't mean they have the truth. Type, I was wrong. The air in the trauma suite had shifted from the stagnant, heavy scent of death to the electric, high-stakes charge of a combat zone. Anna Cole was no longer the extra nurse who restocked gauze. She was the commanding officer of that 5-meter circle. She completely ignored the gasps of the residents and the stuttering, incoherent protests of Dr. Vance, who was being physically ushered to the hallway by 2 stone-faced SEALs. "Lieutenant," Anna barked at Elias, "I need you to hold his left hand. Keep your own pulse steady. He needs to feel a familiar living rhythm. Do not let go, no matter what happens." Elias obeyed instantly, his military training taking over his civilian confusion. He realized that this woman wasn't just a nurse. She was something else, something he hadn't seen in the civilian world for a very long time. She had the 1,000-yard stare of a veteran. Anna began to work with a speed and precision that made the resident doctors look like fumbling amateurs. She didn't rely on the expensive, automated machines that were misinterpreting the Admiral's unique physiology. She used her hands, feeling the tension in the Admiral's neck, monitoring his breathing by the rise and fall of his chest. She adjusted the IV flow manually, drop by agonizing drop, balancing his chemistry by instinct and experience. "Who are you?" Vance stammered from the doorway, his ego completely shattered. What was that call sign? That's classified information." Anna didn't look up from the Admiral's flickering eyelids. "His name isn't Admiral Sterling to everyone, Doctor. To some of us, he's Iron Shadow, the man who stayed behind in a burning valley so his entire team could get to the extraction point. He's not dying of a heart attack. He's stuck in a trauma loop. He thinks he's still in the valley, waiting for a rescue that he doesn't think is coming." As Anna worked to stabilize the Admiral's crashing blood chemistry, Lieutenant Elias began to stare intensely at her face through her surgical mask. He looked at the way she handled the trauma kit with a brutal efficiency. He looked at the calm, rhythmic way she breathed under the immense pressure of the room. "You're Mitchell," Elias whispered, his voice cracking with a sudden, sharp realization. "Sergeant Anna Mitchell, the lead combat medic from the 2nd Battalion. Anna paused for a fraction of a second, her hands hovering over a syringe. Then she continued her work without looking at him. "I'm Nurse Cole now, Lieutenant. Let's focus on the patient. He's not stable yet." "No," Elias said, turning to the other SEALs in the room, his eyes shimmering with awe. "It's her. She's the angel of Kandahar. She's the one who kept the Admiral's heart beating for 6 hours in a lightless cave while we were completely surrounded by enemy forces. We thought you died in the explosion at the safe house 3 years ago. We held a memorial for you." The room was stunned into a profound silence. The unqualified nurse was a legendary war hero. She was a combat medic who had received a Silver Star, a record that had been redacted from public files for her own protection after a high-stakes mission went south. "I didn't die," Anna said softly, her eyes never leaving the Admiral's face as his breathing began to even out. "I just decided I was tired of people shooting at me while I was trying to save lives. I wanted a quiet life. I wanted to help people who weren't in the middle of a war, but I never forgot the Admiral's rhythm. I knew his heart better than any machine in this hospital. I knew that medicine alone wouldn't bring him back from where he was. He was stuck in the memory of that cave. He thought he was still waiting for the signal to come home." The Admiral's breathing began to deepen and slow. The monitor finally showed a steady, rising trend of oxygen saturation. The crisis was passing. Anna began to step back, her hands finally beginning to shake as the massive surge of adrenaline started to fade from her system. The SEALs in the room, men who were trained to be the toughest, most unyielding warriors on the planet, all did something simultaneously that brought tears to the eyes of the watching residents. They stood at rigid attention. They snapped their heels together and gave Anna Cole a crisp, formal military salute. Brenda, the head nurse who had mocked and belittled Anna for weeks, stood in the back of the room, her face pale with a crushing weight of shame. She realized that while she had been treating Anna like a nuisance and a trainee, she had been standing in the presence of a living legend, a woman who had done more for the country in one night than Brenda had in her entire career. Anna didn't acknowledge the salute. She didn't want the glory. She just turned to the junior resident, who was standing humbled in the corner. He needs a slow saline flush and absolute quiet. No more paddles, and tell Dr. Vance to stay in his office. The Admiral has fought enough battles today. Let him rest in the peace he earned. She walked toward the stainless steel sink, washed her hands with a methodical, heavy silence, and walked out of the room without looking back. She didn't wait for a thank you. She didn't wait for the military to award her another medal. She went to the staff break room, sat in a plastic chair under the flickering lights, and finally let a single hot tear fall. The extra nurse had just snatched a titan from the yays of death, not with a scalpel or a drug, but with a memory and a call sign that only two people in that room understood. If you believe that the people who work in silence are often the most powerful, type, I am indebted. By the time the sun began to rise over the city, the atmosphere inside St. Jude's military wing had changed completely. The news of what had happened in the VIP suite had traveled through the sterile corridors like a wildfire. Every staff member, from the night shift janitors to the hospital's board of directors, knew the story of Nurse Cole and the call sign. Anna was back on her regular morning shift. She was restocking the same bandages, changing the same linens, and checking the same monitors. But today, the world looked at her differently. People stepped aside when she walked by in the hallway. The residents stopped to open doors for her. The senior surgeons, men who usually looked through her as if she were made of glass, now looked at her with a mixture of profound awe and visible fear. Dr. Vance was waiting for her outside the central pharmacy. He didn't have his usual swagger. His white coat looked wrinkled, and he looked like a man who had seen his own soul and didn't like the reflection. Nurse Cole, he began, his voice hesitant and lacking its usual bite. Anna stopped, her tray of supplies held steady and level. Yes, doctor. Is there a clinical issue? I wanted to apologize, Vance said, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of pure professional submission. It was a gesture he had probably never performed in his 30-year career. I was blinded by my own protocols. I was blinded by my ego. I didn't listen to the room. I didn't listen to the man. You saved his life, and in doing so, you saved my career from a catastrophic mistake. I owe you everything. Anna looked at him with a gaze that was neither angry nor forgiving. It was simply honest. Don't apologize to me, Dr. Vance. Apologize to the next junior nurse you try to silence. Expertise doesn't always wear a white coat and a tie. Sometimes it wears a dusty, muddy boot. Medicine is about the patient, not the doctor's reputation. Remember that the next time someone crashes. Later that afternoon, Lieutenant Elias found her in the hospital's small roof garden during her 15-minute break. He didn't say anything at first. He just handed her a small, weathered silver coin, a SEAL Team 3 Challenge coin, the highest honor a civilian could receive from his unit. The Admiral is awake, Elias said, his voice thick with emotion. He's weak, but he's lucid, and he's asking for his medic. He said he heard a voice in the valley. Anna felt a heavy lump in her throat. She walked to the Admiral's room, but this time the armed SEALs at the door didn't even ask for her ID. They stepped back in perfect unison, clearing a path for her as if she were a visiting 5-star general. Admiral Sterling was sitting up, propped by pillows. His face was still pale, but his eyes, those legendary piercing blue eyes, were sharp and full of life. When Anna entered, a faint, knowing smile touched his cracked lips. He reached out his hand, the same hand that had clamped onto her wrist in the darkness of the crash. Anna took it, her hand disappearing into his large calloused palm. For a long moment, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. In their minds, they were back in the valley, back in the cave, but this time the smoke had cleared and the sunlight was hitting their faces. "You're a terrible ghost, Mitchell," the Admiral rasped, his voice sounding like grinding gravel. "I told you to go home and stay safe 5 years ago." "I tried, sir," Anna whispered, a small smile finally reaching her eyes. "But you always did have a habit of making my life difficult. I couldn't let you have the last word." "Thank you," the Admiral said, his grip tightening for a second, "for listening when no one else in this city could hear me." As Anna walked out of the room, she saw Brenda, the head nurse, waiting for her by the station. Brenda didn't bark an order. Instead, she handed Anna a new set of scrubs. These ones had the lead trauma nurse patch embroidered on the shoulder. "I think you've been wearing the wrong rank for a while, Anna," Brenda said, her voice soft and genuinely apologetic. Anna took the scrubs, but she didn't put them on yet. She looked at the hospital, at the busy halls, the beeping machines, and the people in pain. She realized that her mission wasn't to be a war hero or a legend. It was to be a bridge between the cold, sterile world of modern medicine and the warm, beating heart of human reality. If you believe that character is more important than a title, type, "I will be kind." The Admiral was officially discharged a month later. He didn't leave in a luxury limo or a private car. He left in a standard military transport, flanked by the men who would have died for him. Before he boarded the vehicle, he turned back to the hospital entrance and looked at the woman standing on the concrete steps. Anna Cole didn't take the executive promotion they offered her. She didn't want the private office, the higher salary, or the administrative power. She stayed on the floor. She stayed in the trauma ward. She stayed exactly where the patients were most vulnerable, where she could hear the whispers that the machines missed. The hospital, however, was never the same after that night. Under Anna's quiet but firm influence, the culture of the wing shifted. Dr. Vance started a new residency program where junior nurses and medics were encouraged to participate in diagnostic rounds. The doctor is God mentality was slowly replaced by a patient-first reality. One day, a young, nervous nurse came up to Anna in the break room. "How do you do it?" the girl asked, looking at Anna's calm demeanor. "How do you know when to speak up against the doctors?" Anna smiled, the same weary, beautiful smile that had comforted dying soldiers in a dark mountain pass. "You stop looking at the monitors, honey," she said softly, "and you start listening to the silence of the patient. Every person has a call sign, a reason they want to live. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." Lieutenant Elias often visited Anna on his leave. They would have coffee in the garden and talk about the brothers they had lost in the field. They never talked about the medals, the silver stars, or the rank. They talked about the goodie to the person standing next to you. "We almost lost him that night," Elias said one evening as the sun set. Anna shook her head. "You didn't almost lose him. You just stopped listening to him. The body knows how to survive almost anything, Elias, but the soul needs a reason to stay in the fight. I just gave him his reason to come home." The story of Anna Cole and the Admiral became a legend in the military medical community. Not because of a miracle drug, a high-tech surgery, or a billionaire's donation, but because of the simple, undeniable power of presence. In a world filled with loud voices, grand titles, and expensive machines, the person who saves the day is often the one who is quietest, the one who has seen the absolute darkest parts of the world and isn't afraid to walk through it to bring someone back. Anna Cole went home that night, slept a peaceful, dreamless sleep, and woke up the next morning to do it all again. Because to her, a call sign wasn't just a military code. It was a promise. A promise that no matter how loud the static of the world becomes, there is always someone listening for your voice in the dark. True value is never determined by your rank, your title, or the size of your paycheck. It is determined by the depth of your character and your willingness to see what others choose to ignore because of their own ego. Don't ever let someone else's position make you feel small. Your voice, even if it is just a whisper in a crowded room, might be the only thing that can save a soul. The strongest people are those who carry the most hidden scars, comment, respect, and don't forget to subscribe to SN Touching Stories for more powerful, true, and inspiring stories about the everyday heroes who remind us what truly matters. Thank you for watching.